Thank you, and good morning. My name is David Philippson. This cartoon character is meant to be me, but as you can see, he works out and goes to the gym far more than I do. It's my first time to Istanbul, second time to Turkey, so I'd like to say it's a pleasure for me to be here. Amongst many other things, I am an advisory board member to an exciting startup based here in Turkey called App Samurai, and it was the App Samurai team that got me this speaking slot today. So I'd like to thank Emery and App Samurai and the MMA for inviting me here today to speak with you. And what I'd like to speak to you about is a topic that I find fascinating. It's growing incredibly quickly, but it is poorly explained and it is very poorly understood by the whole market. So I would like to spend some time talking to you about app install fraud. But before I go into detail, I think it's important that I give you some context as to why I am a subject matter expert in fraud. And to be clear, it's not because I'm a fraudster. It's quite the opposite. So I have run several of my own companies, two of which are super relevant. One of which was a performance ad network that we started in 2009. And it was one of the first companies that was offering a CPI, a cost per install. And through running that business for many years, it became obvious to me that it's that CPI metric, or the ability for an individual publisher to be paid a very high bounty, a very high incentive to drive a download. It gives very big incentives to the bad actors as well. As opposed to a publisher being paid on a CPM or a CPC, you know, they can get paid $1, $2, $5, $10 for an install. That's an incredibly high incentive for bad actors to try and drive fake installs. So the second business that I founded that is super relevant to this topic was I was the founder of the first mobile attribution company. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with MMPs, mobile measurement partners or platforms. You know, some of our good friends are here today, like Adjust. I'm sure you're familiar with AppsFlyer, Kachava, and there are a few others. But I was the founder of the first of this bunch called ADX Tracking. We were acquired in 2013 by a company called Criteo. Now, that's relevant because what I understood, you know, whilst building that business, is that the majority of the bad guys' efforts go into understanding and defrauding mobile app install attribution. So it was the combination of these two kind of experiences of me building businesses, seeing problems, trying to solve problems, that have made me a subject matter expert in the area of app install fraud. Now, who can tell me what a meth bot is? Maybe it might be too early for some audience participation, but I'll give you 2 seconds. Nope? All right, I'll give you a clue. It's got nothing to do with this guy. Nothing to do with Breaking Bad at all. But I'll explain. So a meth bot was an extremely sophisticated ad fraud scheme that was identified at the end of 2017. It was extremely sophisticated. It was doing app install fraud, video fraud on desktop, on mobile. It was netting up to $5 million per day of advertisers' money. So it was huge. And it was kind of broadcast in the press as a big success. But when I read this, you know, the comparison for me was a bit like the DEA or the FBI putting in the headlines that they'd caught a load of drugs and arms crossing the Mexican border. The reality is it's one of thousands. But what is worse in our industry is that this isn't a crime. So these guys didn't go to prison. They just shut up shop and set up another shop next day next door. So it is an extremely big problem that is, in my mind, it is badly understood. It is poorly explained. And with all crime, whether it's in our industry or other industries, I believe that the more the victims understand about how it happens, why it happens, the more likely it is that we can put countermeasures in place. So I think it is right that the industry as a whole spend some time understanding the true definitions of some of these terms, which I will attempt to do today. And there is so much jargon, from clique spamming to clique hijacking to clique flooding. The list goes on. Device ID reset, SDK spoofing, that's a good one. And of course, ad stacking. There's actually many, many more, but for the interest of time and your attention, I'm going to focus on trying to explain what some of this means. But I also think it's important to consider, as with all crime, who the victims are. Because it's quite easy for us all to kind of shrug our shoulders and think this doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. I've got my job. It doesn't really matter. But my point is, it does affect you. It affects everyone in this industry. Assuming you're not a fraudster, that is. Which is actually a relevant point, because when you consider the GDP that comes from app install fraud, it's actually very likely that there are some participants, at least some people that are complicit in app install fraud, with us here today. So maybe you take a long, hard look at the person to the right and left of you. But assuming you're not a fraudster, you are a victim. Whether you are a user acquisition manager for an app that didn't get paid their bonus, maybe you are a legitimate ad network that an advertiser's refusing to pay because there's a bit of fraud went through your network unknowingly to you. Maybe you are a legitimate app publisher. Maybe you develop utilities or games, and you are having the installs that you're driving stolen away from you through attribution fraud. Maybe you're lucky enough to be a VC, a venture capitalist, or a shareholder in one of the unicorns, in Amazon or Airbnb, that often are targeted with these methods by the bad actors. So my point is that everyone is a victim of app install fraud. But I also think it's important to put into context, how big a problem this is. Now, these numbers that I'll put in front of you are from our good friends at AppsFlyer. They have a huge amount of data on it. Obviously, they would do as an attribution company. But I want to highlight that I believe these are extremely conservative, because I think there's a lot of attribution fraud that they're not detecting. So according to AppsFlyer, app install fraud in Q1 this year was $800 million. That's 800 million bucks paid to the bad guys. It's huge. Up to 11.5% of all paid installs are fake installs. Personally, from the data science and the research that I have done, I believe it's a lot higher. I believe it's 20 to 30%. And that was a 30% increase on last year. Now, this is second only to organized crime of drugs, guns, and human trafficking. And this is our industry. When you put it into that context, you can actually start thinking this is a problem, we need to do something about it. But when you're studying the problem, it's also important that you consider the role that attribution has in this whole area. Now, to be clear, I have huge respect for the founders and senior management team of all of the attribution companies. I was one of them. I competed with them for years. When you're competing with people, you also develop friendships and respect for one another. So, however, if app install fraud is a big clock, then attribution is one of the main cogs in that whole dilemma. Now, I see these companies as the accountants of the industry. They are the third parties that are counting installs from many competing entities. You have different factions, you have DSPs, ad networks, social media companies, media companies. They are all competing for the same media dollars from the same advertisers, and they're all trying to be the last click that wins, because the attribution methodology is last click wins. So you have all of these competing entities, and you have the attribution companies that are the trusted third parties So they're the accountants of the industry. And that's important. And I'll come back to it later. But who are these companies? So first of all, this was my business, Addict Tracking, acquired by Criteo. We decommissioned the product and changed it into an in-app retargeting product in 2015. There was then Has Offers, became Mobile App Tracking, became Tune. It was recently been acquired by Branch. There's then Apps Flyer, founded by Oren and his co-founder in Tel Aviv. There's then Kachava, Charles from Idaho in the USA, and then Adjust, Christian from Berlin, and then AppSolar, that was recently acquired by Singular, based in California. So these 5 are the attribution companies, the main. There's another couple of small ones, but these 5 are the ones that have all of the market share. These are the accountants, the trusted third parties for counting app installs. So let's have a look at who the bad guys are. Now, these are real people. So for my own safety, I have changed their names because I don't want them going after me. So let me introduce you to Boris. Boris is a real person. Boris is based in Moscow. He runs a legitimate gaming studio. He is a real publisher. So he's actually serving real ads within his real games. He used to be a client of mine. Interestingly, he's now a client of both Adjust and Apps Flyer. He even licenses their fraud modules. Think about that. I'd like to introduce you to another chap that I know, called Mr. Chai, who has a particular liking for Lamborghinis and Bugattis. He's a very wealthy guy, Mr. Chai. He's based in Beijing. He runs a global ad network. So, you know, he runs a legitimate ad network. He runs a legitimate business. He used to be a media buyer on my performance business. I used to run that affiliate network. That's how I know him. Today, he has access to advertisers' Clique URLs. Of course he does. It's an ad network. So if one of these legitimate app install advertisers is running on his network, he's got access to the Clique URLs. Like Boris, he has developed his own games, utility, and adult apps, some of which are downloaded outside of Google Play and Apple App Store. Now that's relevant, because both Boris and Mr. Chai have got install bases of their own apps that allows them to implement and run malware on people's smartphones. It's very likely within this room today that there is malware running on these smartphones. But to be clear, the definition of malware, it's just software that is doing something that A, you don't know about, and you probably wouldn't want it to be doing. So these are 2 people that I know. Obviously, there are hundreds and thousands of people just like Boris and Mr. Chai. So now, just taking a bit of a deep dive into the toolkit that these 2 guys use very frequently. Now, I would break this down into 2 parts, into attribution fraud and into download fraud. Where attribution fraud is where the bad actor is stealing a real download. Now, he's just stealing it from somebody else. He's stealing the credit. He's stealing the attribution, either from organic or another paid source. Excuse me. Whilst download fraud is when the bad actor is actually faking a download. The download may never have even happened, or it wasn't a human. So there's 2 kind of distinct different areas, and I'm going to take a bit of a deep dive into both. So first of all, Clique hijacking. So the aim of Clique hijacking is to steal another publisher's legitimate install. So another publisher's running an ad, and the bad guys want to steal it. It requires malware to be installed on millions of devices. They need access to MMP, the mobile measurement partner, the attribution Clique URLs. And what the fraudster is doing is the fraudster is actually listening to when the legitimate publisher is serving an ad. So here we've got a legitimate publisher on the phone, and of course we have Mr. Chai's app on the same phone. And what Mr. Chai's app is doing It is listening for when the legitimate app is serving an ad, in this instance for Uber. And Uber gets a click. Now what Mr. Chai does, he hears that click and he quickly sends his own click. He's just fooled the attribution methodology. He's just got the last click that wins. And of course, the attribution company, when the download happens, it's none the wiser. How could it be? Gives Mr. Chai credit. He's just hijacked a legitimate publisher, essentially stolen their revenue. So now let's take a look at clique spamming. It sounds quite aggressive. It is. The goal of clique spamming is to steal an organic install. Now, from Boris and Mr. Chai's perspective, the best targets for this type of hack or attack are developers that have millions of organic installs. So think Just Eat, Airbnb, Uber, some of the big unicorns in the industry, games, it's the Supercells, it's the Gamelofts, it's the big ones that get millions of organic downloads. Now, what they are going to be doing is sending clicks from millions of devices from their malware. And in my example here, Mr. Chai will be sending a click. He's got the click attribution URLs. He can send these clicks in the background from the smartphone device without the user having any idea at all. He then does this from millions of devices. So it's a statistical model. So you need that malware install base. And he does this from millions of devices. And then eventually, statistically, it makes sense, right? That one of these devices, one of the millions of devices, would have gone ahead and installed Amazon, Uber, or Just Eat anyway. And of course, when he does, or when that individual does install it organically, he gets credit. So that is clique spamming. Thirdly, within the attribution, click hijacking. Click injection. Whilst the previous version was to steal an organic download, but it only works on the big apps, concerningly for us, click injection is to steal an organic download, but for any sized app, as long as they're running paid media. Now, only works on Android, and what the bad actor is doing through their malware, it is listening for what I consider a security weakness in Google Play. Google Play makes a broadcast when an app, any app, when the installation is initiated, which gives the bad actor an opportunity, because the malware is configured, to listen to Google Play. And it's listening to Google Play to hear when an app install has initiated, giving Mr. Chai the time and opportunity to send a click to the attribution company, which, of course, when it's installed, he gets credit. So those are all of the, not all, but those are some of the main methods that bad actors are using to gain credit for installs that they should not have been credit for. And this is a there's hundreds of millions of dollars that these people are making from these types of fraud. You can see why it's important to bring this to all of our attention, right? So previously, that was all attribution fraud. What I'll talk to you about now is download fraud. Now, let me introduce you to the dark arts of SDK spoofing. Now, it requires very detailed knowledge of the attribution company's SDKs. Used to happen to my company. We used to see very strange behavior coming in. But it requires detailed knowledge of the attribution company's SDKs. But remember, Mr. Chai and Boris are customers of the attribution companies. So they have this type of detailed knowledge. Now, what the bad actor will do, it will send a fake click to the attribution company. It then, from their malware install base or their device farms, which they have, I'll come on to you in a moment. So it sends a click from a real device. They then know the content of the API call to the attribution company that makes the attribution company believe an install has occurred. if you know the content of that API call, it's quite easy to fake it. You just send it from that smartphone. The attribution company counts the download. Now, advertisers say they're becoming a bit more sophisticated and they don't pay for installs anymore. They'll pay more for a profile creation. Well, it doesn't work because it's quite easy to hack an event called profile creation or get to level 2 or get to level 3. So that is SDK spoofing. Finally, device ID reset and device farms. So have you ever wondered where your previous 5 smartphones have gone? If you're anything like me, I kind of hope it's been recycled and gone to some poor kid in sub-Saharan Africa, giving them access to Mark Zuckerberg's free internet. Unfortunately, that really probably isn't the case. There is a huge secondary market, and it's more than likely that your old iPhone is owned by Boris. He has teams of engineers updating operating systems, installing VPNs. His device farms are incredibly organized. He has different areas of different devices, different regions around the world that he can quickly deploy campaigns on. Now, what he does, when he sees a new install on his legitimate business, on their network or in their publisher app, he's already got the Clique URL. He just deploys that in his device farm. Click to the App Store, installs Uber, gets credit from the attribution company. He then deletes the app, resets the device ID, and does it again, and again, and again. So, again, advertisers think they're getting smart, but whenever the advertiser takes a step ahead, the fraudster also takes a countermeasure, and so on and so on. So, this is constantly evolving, and it's important that we all understand it, but it's also important to consider who is being fooled. Because the advertiser pays and trusts the attribution partner. The legitimate publishers and networks, they're forced to bill off the attribution partner's numbers. They haven't got any choice. If you want to get an IO from a big app developer, you have to bill off the attribution partner's numbers. The accountant's numbers. Kind of makes sense, right? But all of the fraudsters' efforts are going in to fooling the attribution company's numbers and methodologies and technology into false negatives and false positives. And to be clear, they are succeeding. They are fooling the accountant. So if that is true, if attribution is the accountant, then fraud prevention, detection, and reduction is the auditor, right? It makes sense. And with all industries, it's very important that the accountant doesn't audit their own books. So in my honest opinion, it's not right for attribution companies, companies that I founded, it's not right for attribution companies to license separately fraud prevention modules. It's absolutely essential that they are built in to their core offering to ensure they haven't got a conflict of interest. If they have the capability to reduce fraud, then that should be part of their core offering so that they can maintain their commitment to advertisers and to publishers that are forced to bill off their numbers. So, from my experience, my recommendation to you, if you're an app developer that is spending millions of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars on app install, it would be to choose a reliable accountant. All 5 of those that I mentioned before, they're super reliable, they're credible, great businesses. Choose one of these guys for attribution only, but make sure that they have built in all of their fraud detection. How can you ask your publishers to get paid off their numbers unless their fraud detection is baked into their core offering? And then choose an independent auditor, a third party for fraud solutions to detect, report, and reduce fraud. So that is my recommendation to you today. And on that note, I'd like to wrap up by announcing that my good colleagues from App Samurai that have a booth here today have today launched what I believe is a world-first independent fraud detection, reduction, reporting module that can integrate with the MMPs. They are here today, and I would encourage any of you that are running paid media campaigns for App Install to go and speak to my colleagues at the App Samurai booth. That is the end of my talk. Bang on 25 minutes. Thank you very much.